For those of you who I haven't met or talked to on the phone, I'm Susie Tierney. I'm the Executive Director of Just Faith Ministries, and a hearty welcome to all of you. We're thrilled about this racial justice series, and so we're excited to share a little bit about it with you this evening. On the phone with me, who will also be sharing, I'll introduce give them a little more of an introduction, but Leela Oakley, our Outreach and Engagement Associate, Kristen Dollar, our Director of Programs, and our founder and advisor on our staff, Jack Jezreel, is also on the phone with us. So for those that just came on, welcome. Jack has the honor of, for those of you that are new to us, we always start our meetings with prayer. And so we've asked Jack to start us with prayer. And he's a very talented writer. So I don't know if he's chosen one of his own or if you've chosen a different one, Jack, but it's all.
Well, actually, Susie, tonight I've chosen some lesser authors, Nelson Mandela and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So you'll pardon me if it's not quite up to the normal quality. So yes, our prayer tonight begins with a reflection by Nelson Mandela and then goes straight into a prayer for racial justice that's attributed to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The quote from Nelson Mandela: "No one is born hating another person because of the color of their skin, or their background, or their religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love." Gracious God, when our eyes do not see the gravity of racial injustice, shake us from our slumber and open our eyes, O Lord. When out of fear we are frozen into inaction, give us a spirit of bravery, O Lord. When we try our best but say the wrong things, give us a spirit of humility, O Lord. When the chaos of this moment in time dies down, give us a lasting spirit of solidarity, O Lord. When it becomes easier to point fingers outward, help us examine our own hearts, O Lord. God of truth, in your wisdom, enlighten us. God of love, in your mercy, forgive us. God of hope, in your kindness, heal us. Creator of all people, in your generosity, guide us. Racism breaks your heart. Break our hearts for what breaks yours, O Lord. You called us to be in relationship with one another and promised to dwell wherever two or three are gathered. In our country, we are many different people. We come from many different places, have many different cultures. Open our hearts that we may be bold in finding the riches of inclusion and the treasures of diversity among us. We pray in faith. Amen.
Thank you so much, Jack. Powerful words. Just a couple of Zoom logistics. And then for those of you who are new to Just Faith Ministries, I just want to share just a couple of things about who we are. So the Zoom logistics, just know that you will all be muted through the entire call. And that's, just so in case somebody doesn't accidentally mute, doesn't accidentally leave themselves unmuted, that we don't have all the background noise. So you'll all be muted throughout the call. But for questions and answers, we're going to ask you to send your questions to Leela through the chat box. And again, Leela, if you would wave, she's our Outreach and Engagement Associate. And so as we're going along this evening, you might send your if you think of questions, I'd hang on to your questions until we get done, and then send them if we don't answer them in the context of the overview tonight. And so with that, just a couple of words about Just Faith Ministries. We're an organization, of course, we're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Louisville, Kentucky. And our expertise is developing programs and resources for small groups. And so we develop programs where we connect and prepare people for what we call the life-changing, world-changing work of the gospel. So that gives you a little clue that all of our programming at this point is really designed through the lens of the Christian faith. Although down the road we may expand a little bit, but for now we develop programs through the lens of the Christian faith. Our small group programs are really designed to help people deepen their faith in these small groups, to invite learning about contemporary social issues, and really to inspire action on those issues. So learning and action. So that's a little bit about who we are. We are as I said, a nonprofit organization, and we're primarily donor supported. So I always say that because it gives me an opportunity just to thank anybody who's a donor that might happen to be on the call. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Programs, the Reverend Kristen Dollar. Kristen is a United Methodist elder. She's ordained in the United Methodist Church. Kristen developed this with consultants, and I'll share a little bit more about how we developed this later. But Kristen's going to share a little bit about why our programs, why this racial justice series, and why it's an appropriate response to what's happening right now, and why it might be of interest to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Hi, everyone. So good to see some familiar faces on here too. Well, I just wanted to give you a few reasons about why we are offering these racial justice programs in the first place, and some of my own hopes in helping to write these programs, what I was hoping that these programs would accomplish. And so the first one is kind of obvious. If you are on here, you know that we need to talk about racial injustice. You know this. We have to talk about the root causes of the racial wealth gap. We have to talk about why that for every $100 a white family has in wealth, Black families only have $5.04. We have to talk about the reasons why George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery were killed. And we have to talk about the reasons why our neighborhoods are still segregated, and why we have mass incarceration, how mass incarceration is affecting families, especially Black and Latino ones. We cannot sidestep these issues any longer, and we cannot pretend that we are colorblind. So that's one of the primary reasons why we created these programs. And I thank you all so very much for opting into these conversations, because if you're white, it is a choice to opt in. A second reason why we created these is because we know that if we want to be effective at racial justice, we have to be strategic about it. Because especially in the church and in other institutions as well, our strategies haven't always been as effective as we had hoped that they would be. I get it. As Susie said, I'm a United Methodist pastor, and as a young pastor, I started out preaching about injustice and working on a podcast and creating statements and having debates with people in the front office. And at worst, people got angry and they left the conversation. And at the best, they were inspired, but their inspiration didn't last quite so much as to change their lives. Those things didn't work, but what has worked is holy conversation. And that's the reason, one of the primary reasons why I took this job at Just Faith. And it is the foundation of all of our programs. Each of our programs, including our racial justice program, starts with the guidelines for holy conversation. So how do we really listen to one another, especially in the political environment that we're in right now? How do we listen to one another? And when the going gets tough, how do we turn to wonder rather than judgment? Participants learn to drop their defensiveness so that real introspection can take place. And it's in at least my overwhelming experience, it's in holy conversation rather than these other methods that people can really hear the voice of God, and they can really do this hard work of becoming anti-racist and learning how to do this work. A third reason we developed these is because we realized that we have to stop depending on other people to do this work for us. We have to step up to the plate. And so we made our programs really easy for anyone, regardless of whether you're clergy or not, regardless of whether you're an expert on this subject or not. We made these programs hopefully easy for people to facilitate them, ordinary folks like me. We made it so that there's a script so that you can read the script and also participate in the dialogue along with your group members. And we also have amazing facilitator support. And I'm speaking as a white person here. Sometimes we've assumed that anti-racism is the work of people of color. And Susie and I recently met with a facilitator of color, and as she put it, racism won't end until white people end racism. And so it's our responsibility to do this work. And so we hope that our programs will give you the tools that you need to feel confident in doing that, even when we do make mistakes. The fourth reason that we're creating these programs, offering these programs, is because we don't, as Susie mentioned, we don't just need to talk about racial injustice and be educated on it. That is super important. But we also are called to action. We realize that anyone can be in a book club, and that is really great. But people are craving tools, practical tools that are effective in their own communities. And so we incorporated those in each of our 3 programs on racial justice. And our third program is particularly focused on organizing people so that they can make change, and not just as individuals, but as a group, and they can inspire other people to stand alongside them and stand up for change as well, so that their change can be even more effective and even more long-lasting. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this work and for joining in the conversation. It's so good to see so many people here. And I'm grateful for you all as my community, even though we are just over Zoom. It's so good to see all of you. So Susie, I will turn it over to you to hear so that you can hear a little bit more in detail about our programs.
Thank you, Kristen. I'm going to share just a little bit about the program series. I'm going to take about 10 minutes to speak a little bit more to the content, whether you're interested in participating or wanting to get a group off the ground yourself. And then Leela, our Outreach and Engagement Associate, will share just some general logistics and some announcements that will be of interest to you. And then we hope by the time we're done, there's about 20 minutes worth of time just for you all to feed us questions that you'd like to have answered tonight. So let me start with how we created the program, because that's really important. As you can see, looking at us, I'm white and Kristen's white and Leela is white, and so it's worth talking about. Kristen, to develop this program, she worked really in tandem and collaborated very closely with a woman that we're lucky enough to have on our board. Her name is Dr. Vicki Vernon-Lott. If Vicki's on the phone, we think she's spectacular. Vicki's been a member of Pax Christi USA's anti-racism team, and she's also a trained facilitator of racial sobriety with Father Clarence Williams, and is a racial equity consultant with Joyce James Consulting. So Vicki helps lead conversations on race around the country. And so we were just lucky enough to have Vicki's wisdom combined with Kristen's gifts and skills to create this program. In addition, we have here in Kentucky, we're lucky enough to have Simmons College of Kentucky, which is the only historically Black college here in Kentucky. And one of the visiting professors of preaching and Black church studies at the Baptist Seminary of Kentucky, which is a position shared with Simmons College of Kentucky. One of their professors also consulted on this, Dr. Lewis Brogdon. He served in numerous positions in undergraduate and graduate institutions. He was assistant professor of New Testament and Black Church Studies at Louisville Presbyterian Seminary, for example. So Dr. Brogdon helped consult on this. And then in the end, Simmons College became a collaborator on this, and the president of the college provided a video for us for the program, and have been actively engaged with us on the work. So that's how the program was developed. It was developed in a collaboration. So what is this racial justice series, as we call it? It's actually, when we say series, we mean there are 3 8-session programs. And each of those 3 8-session programs have an opening retreat and an immersion experience as well. The immersion experience is some engagement, some personal engagement, or some in-person engagement in the community. Although in-person is a little difficult right now, here's where I interject, we have virtual adaptations. And as I said, our programs are designed through the lens of the Christian faith. So really it takes the Christian faith perspective into the issue of racial justice. So the 3 programs, each 8 sessions in this series. The first program in this series is called Faith and Racial Equity, Exploring Power and Privilege. And that's really what it is in a nutshell. I mean, the title really names what it is. This particular program in this series comes at racial justice through the framework of privilege, whether we're talking about white privilege or economic privilege, but privilege. And it invites some real introspection in this first program. The books that we use in the program to support this first one that we created in the series are I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austin Channing Brown, and then White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. Some of the session themes that you might encounter in this very first program would be not just looking at the issue of racial justice through the lens of privilege, but socialization, the origins of race and racial identity, the effect of whiteness on institutions and communities. So that's racialized messages in the media. Those are some of the topics that you would learn about in that program. The second program we developed is called Faith and Racial Healing, Embracing Truth, Justice, and Restoration. The books in this particular program in the series are Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing by Dr. Joy DeGruy, and The Color of Compromise, The Truth About the American Church's Complicity in Racism by Jamar Tisby. And so those 2 books are the primary reading in that particular, in this second program, Faith and Racial Healing. Faith and Racial Healing comes at the racial justice issue through the lens of our history of racism in the US, but also, as you can see from the book, our complicity with racism even in our American churches. So it really comes at this racial justice issue with the historical framework. Some of the session topics that you might, that you will, be a part of if you were to do this particular program in this series are, the Middle Passage, reading and discussing slave narratives, convict leasing, confessing our history of lynching. So some of those things that have actually framed, where we are today and have how our current racial injustices have come out of this history, and some of that history and how it's developed into issues that need to be addressed today. The third program in this series, as Kristen already mentioned, this one is Faith and Racial Justice, Changing Systems and Structures. And again, that's exactly what it is. Kristen mentioned this, that this third program really focuses on the contemporary issues surrounding racial injustice that come out of that history of privilege, or that come out of privilege or come out of our history of racism in the US. So program 3 in the series, Faith and Racial Justice, really delves into some of the modern day contemporary issues. Some of them are coming to light right now with the racial unrest in the country, and happily so. That it's long overdue that some of these issues are being brought into the light in a way that they haven't been in the last few years, at least. Some of this racial unrest, it's just a wonderful thing that there's a beam of light being put on some of these issues, like the racial wealth gap, the reparations debate, and how we enter into that, the redlining piece, mass incarceration, and some of those things, as I said, that have come out of our history of racism or our privileged lens. The books in this particular program in this series are The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander's book is a little bit older. It doesn't have a current copyright. Unfortunately, what I'm about to say, it should horrify us all, but not much has changed since Michelle Alexander wrote the book several years ago. So we use that because she does a brilliant job of framing this mass incarceration issue and biases. And then we also use an organizing guide called Building a Movement to End the New Jim Crow. And this organizing guide is by Daniel Hunter. There's one book that I haven't mentioned that goes through all 3 programs in the series, and it is a book that was developed by a person in the administration at Simmons College. Her name is Sherry Mills, and it's called 40 Days of Prayer. I don't have time to tell you about the Angela Project, but it was a part of the Angela Project. And this particular book is in all 3 of the racial justice programs, and it serves as the basis of the spiritual practice. So all of our programs have a spiritual practice, how we integrate it into our faith in our everyday lives, and that book provides the basis for the spiritual practice. We get a lot of questions. I'm just going to say a couple more things, and then I will turn it over to Leela. But we get a lot of questions about what, you name them. Here's the first one we did. Here's the second. Here's the third. And what order should we do them in? And what we recommend, whether you're participating or facilitating, what we recommend is that you do either faith and racial equity, or faith and racial healing before you do faith and racial justice. So in other words, we recommend that folks have some experience with looking at racism through the lens of privilege, or looking at racism through the lens of history, before we can even talk about modern day issues that come out of either one of those. So we recommend that folks do one or the other first. Which one you do first is really, you all would have a better read on your communities, or you would have a better sense of what you would want to do personally, or what kind of a group you might want to form. And so we leave that up to you. But we do certainly recommend that you do either the history focused one or the privilege focused one before you do the one on modern day issues. The last thing that I'll say is just the other question that we got that I think it's worth mentioning, and Kristen mentioned this a little bit in her point number 4, and that was, sometimes we get the question, what's the difference between your programs and a book study? And what I typically say about that is this: at the end of the day, if people come out of our programs and they say, that was a really great learning experience, and that's all they say, I'm personally disappointed, and I think most of our staff are too, because what we want is, I had this great learning and experience, and it compelled me to do fill in the blank. So that's the major difference between our programs and a book study. Our programs are much meatier. They're not just you get together and talk about a book. These books are one piece of a bigger program where there's opening prayers, closing prayers, immersion experiences, guest speakers, videos, spiritual practices, discussion, and and the list goes on. And so each session is 2.5 hours long, and that's intentional, because it really takes that amount of time to get deep into these issues. And also, they're designed, I would say every session, but in particular, in the last sessions of each program in the series, we really start to move people out. What are you going to personally do now that you've learned this stuff? And how are you going to take action, both personally and structurally? So that's the difference between our programs and a book study. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leela Oakley. I've introduced Leela already, but I will introduce her again. She's our Outreach and Engagement Associate. She's one that works, all of us are working remotely right now, but she works remotely. She's not in Louisville. She hails from Norfolk, so she's coming to us from Norfolk today.
Thank you, Susie. As Kristen and Susie have both said, it's great to be with you all tonight. Tonight, I'm going to be sharing a short PowerPoint with you where I'm going to talk about what you can expect in all of our Just Faith Ministries programs, but in these programs in particular, some details about that. I'm also going to give you an overview of what a typical session looks like to show you how we break up a session, what we like to do in our sessions. And then I'm going to give you some logistical tips about how to get started. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, if you'll bear with me for a moment. Okay. So what can you expect? At a Just Faith Ministries, oh, there we go. What can you expect? Just Faith Ministries programs, as Susie alluded to, can be done both virtually and in person. So before COVID-19, Just Faith Ministries made programs for small groups who met in person. And while we love the community that can be built in person, we recognize right now and probably for a while it is unsafe for most people to gather together. So we have made each of the programs in this series available for virtual use. We've created adaptations that help span the gap between in-person and virtual, and we have all the support that you need to help you navigate this new platform. For a lot of folks, it can be overwhelming to move to Zoom or another video conferencing platform, but we want to, as a staff, support you so that that is not a barrier to you continuing to learn and to grow and to take action in the midst of COVID-19. All of our programs, as Susie said, are 8 sessions long. And in addition to those 8 sessions, we have a retreat and an immersion experience. The retreat is really a time for the group to get to know one another. And for these 3 programs, the retreat happens before the first session. And it's a time to develop trust and understanding of one another so that when you begin to dive into the content of these programs, you have that base level trust that allows you to be vulnerable with one another and to really be transformed by your connection with one another. The immersion experience, as Susie alluded to, has had to shift in the midst of COVID-19. So traditionally, the immersion experience is a time for you to go out into the community as a small group and engage with an organization or group of people who are bringing about justice and the issue that you are studying in your session. So in these programs, you would go out and engage with a group that was bringing about racial justice in your community. We have given each facilitator, when they register for a program, a list of alternatives for the immersion experience that can be done virtually and safely in the midst of COVID-19. And Just Faith Ministries programs are all small group programs. So when you're meeting in person, we recommend that you have between 8 to 15 individuals who come together to participate in this process with one another. If you're going to be meeting virtually, you could still have 15, but oftentimes I like to recommend a cap of 12 individuals just because it allows for more sharing and more connection when you're limited to interacting over the internet. And as Susie mentioned earlier, all of our programs are 2.5 hours long. And as she said, those are intentionally long because we have a lot of content that we are working through in each session. I will make a note that there are groups that have chosen to reduce that time to 2 hours for their virtual gatherings because that has felt more manageable for their group to meet just for 2 hours. If you do that, there are ways to tweak and adapt the program slightly in order to reduce it to 2 hours, but we really don't recommend shortening it any beyond that. And I can say from my own personal experience, I just finished facilitating a program and we met for 2.5 hours over Zoom and the time flew by every week. So that is up to you to discern whether 2.5 or 2, but just wanted to share that experience. And then finally, the last thing you can expect is weekly assignments. So with our programs, there's reading each week between the sessions from the books assigned for that program. And there's also spiritual practice that comes out of that 40 Days of Prayer book. And on average, folks spend about an hour dedicated to their weekly assignments, anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. So what does a session look like? If you've done one of our programs, you will be familiar with this outline, but some of you may be brand new to us, which is wonderful. And this is what most of our programs look like. You begin your time together with a prayer and an opening meditation. You then move to a time often where there'll be a video that you will watch either together, or you may have watched beforehand, and you'll get to have dialogue and conversation about that. We then allow time for a break so people can get up, stretch their legs, have time for announcements, and then we move into our next big chunk of conversation and dialogue. And that time is really dedicated to conversation around the reading for that week. So as you've been reading and processing on your own, you then get to come together and learn from each other's wisdom in a community together. And then finally, we end each session with closing prayer. So just some practical stuff, how to get started. In order to register for one of our programs, you're going to register through our website, which is justfaith.org. You go to the program page that you're interested in registering for, and it will walk you through an online registration process. Each of these 8-week programs is $175, and that's a one-time fee that you pay to get access to the program for an entire year. In addition to that one-time group fee, you also have the cost of books for participants. And while the figure changes slightly depending on which of the 3 programs you're looking at, the cost is around $35 to $40 per participant, which includes all 3 books. So let's say you're in a community that wants to commit to all 3 programs. You obviously aren't going to buy Sherry Mills's 40 Days of Prayer 3 different times. You would purchase that book once, which would then reduce your overall book cost for the final 2 programs. In addition to registering, which gives you access to the program material, and in addition to ordering the books, you then are going to need to talk about whether it's safe for you to meet in person or to meet virtually, and begin preparing for whatever option is best for your group. And then finally is identifying the facilitators. So at Just Faith Ministries, we create programs that can be led by facilitators who do not have to be experts. As Kristen said, these are written for clergy and lay. They're written for folks who have all different kinds of background. The only thing that you need as a facilitator is some basic facilitation skills and a willingness and a commitment to take the time to do the job well. We have created training for our facilitators for this racial justice series that Dr. Vicki Vernon-Lott leads. We also have support for our facilitators on how to use Zoom. And then we have one-on-one support. That is what I spend most of my days doing, is helping people like you who want to bring this program to their small group, either at their church or in their community. And I help you figure out how to do that and how to do that well. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I just have one more announcement to share with you all before we open it up to questions. Okay, So I have some exciting news. As some of you know, we just released a youth program. So Just Faith Ministries Youth for Justice, our Faith in Action, is a program that invites youth to explore contemporary social issues through the lens of Christian faith. And it is a program that allows youth ministers or leaders to put together their own programming by fitting, by choosing multiple topics in order to meet their group's needs. And each topic is made up of 2 sessions that are 90 minutes long. The first of the 2 sessions provides the faith-based grounding for the subject that you're going to be exploring in those 2 sessions. And the second walks the youth leader through the process of either inviting a guest speaker to come and speak on the topic or planning an immersion experience in your local community. And what we're really excited about, and the reason we wanted to tell you tonight, is that 4 of these topics are centered around racial justice. While these topics expand into other justice issues like care for creation, immigration, homelessness, human trafficking, poverty, we have dedicated 4 programs, which is then 8 total sessions that address racial justice that is geared towards middle school and high school youth. So we wanted to let you know about that, and I'll include that information in the follow-up email that I send out to you tomorrow or on Monday. So with that, I will pause for a moment, and I'm going to be moderating this Q&A. So I will take a look at the chat and give Kristen and Susie an opportunity to work through some of your questions. So feel free to take a moment, send me anything that you have sitting on your mind that you're still wondering about, and I will begin the Q&A process.
Well, while Leela's waiting for questions, I'll just stall a little bit and tell you that, I'm one of those work from home moms. And so I found that provides me with regular doses of humility. and so if I was bumbling on my words in one part of the program, it was because I was being distracted by my children in the background. So anyway, my apologies for that.
Okay, so I have someone, and I just want to speak to this question before I throw a question to Susie and Kristen. Someone asked about wondering where folks were from on this call. We have turned off the public chat for security reasons. So while I would love for you all to be able to connect and meet one another, that is currently disabled and for security reasons. So let's see. Susie, I've got a question for you. Someone's asking, says that they're typically a slower reader and it can be hard for them to work through just the quantity of reading that is between sessions. And they're wondering if you have any suggestions for how to handle that.
Yeah, it's a tough one because there can be a lot of reading between the sessions. The good news is that most of the books that we have available are also available on Amazon. I will also follow that up really quickly by saying we have our own bookstore, and we certainly hope that you would order your books from us. But if somebody's in need of I know that Amazon has a little bit more of an ability to come out with audio versions. And so if you really need an audio version, if that's a more realistic way of getting in the reading, then, ordinarily I would recommend you come straight to our bookstore. But in that case, it might be more, it might be better for you to get an audio version through another publisher. Or another bookstore rather. Otherwise, I would say, as a facilitator myself, a former facilitator who regularly had groups, one of the things that I would always share with our participants is there's the reading assignment and there's what you can get done. And sometimes they're different. So my recommendation is just to get as much of the reading done as you can, but then go back after the program and pick up the pieces that you weren't able to get to.
Thank you. Susie, while you're talking about the bookstore, could you clarify for folks, when they are ordering books, are they to order books as a group or individually? How does that process work?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's the one difference between us and Amazon. We try to keep our prices competitive with their prices. However, at this point, what we're equipped to do is to ship books to groups, not individuals. And so, in this time of COVID, I know that that adds a layer of complexity. But if you are doing this with a group in your area, what we would recommend is that the books be all shipped to a facilitator, and then people either come and pick up from the facilitator or ship to a church, some central location where people can come and pick up the books themselves, because we do fill orders for groups, not necessarily individuals. We can do an occasional individual order. Say if you had 9 people in your immediate area, but you had a 10th person that was really logistically, it wasn't possible for that person to come and get the book. We would take that on a case-by-case basis, but at this point in the life of our organization, we're not equipped to do too many individual orders. So we do encourage you all to put in one book order for your whole group or groups, and then collect monies either before or after, if you're inviting participants to pay.
Okay, Kristen, this question is for you. Someone is asking about the diversity of groups. Should these groups be diverse? What if you're able to only pull together a group that has individuals from one race, or what are your thoughts on racially diverse groups versus more homogenous groups?
Sure, this is an important question from the very beginning when we started to develop these programs. And our consultant, Vicki Lott, leads conversations on race all around the country. And so she helped us to create programs that are for groups regardless of your racial demographics. Of course, it is always enriching to the experience to have some more diversity in your group, but you can certainly do this as if your group is all white. She does recommend, though, if you have a more diverse group, if it is possible, to have at least one co-facilitator of color. But she also says that if this is not possible, to go on ahead, because it's better to be having this conversation.
Thank you, Kristen. I'll open this to either Kristen or Susie, or maybe both of you'd like to give some feedback. Someone's asking if we could give them some information or a story about how these programs are playing out in churches and congregations across the country. So what has been the experience of communities who are either in the process of one of these programs or who have finished the programs?
I can maybe start, Kristen. And I'm assuming that question is, what is the program moving people to do? So let me come at it from this direction. What I will tell you is, before we launched this program series nationally, we had a pilot group, and that pilot group that we did. Well, we had 2 pilot groups. One of the pilot groups was a more diverse group, and the other pilot group was all white. And several of our staff members were able to participate in that pilot group. And just from participating in the pilot group and going through the programs ourselves before we launched it nationally, what I see is a whole new way of being on staff. Like, even though it was a business function, for us to pilot the program and to try and figure out logistically, how it would work, how the content was playing out. In the end, what I can say personally is it was one of the most compelling series that I've ever done. personally. And so it moved me to engage in conversations on race personally in ways that I haven't ever before. I mean, I've engaged in some conversations in the past, but not near at the level that I am right now. And to actively support systemic change. We have people that came out of our group and did did a program on is just doing a program through Simmons College. Kristen, you came out of the group and you did a program with Dr. Brogdon on MLK. So even our own group is sort of a witness of what can happen. I wish I had more testimonies, and maybe Kristen has a couple about, you know, the experience of people coming out of the group and is it transforming churches. In some ways it's too early to tell because we just got groups started in the fall with the first program, and then COVID happened. So many of our groups got paused. And so, you know, we're just now getting to a point where people are finishing and moving on to a second program and things like that. So, you know, give us another year and I'm sure I'll have a plethora of stories to tell you, but our personal staff story is one that I can tell you right now.
I know somebody who is getting a different degree because she went through this program. And I also know someone who has invested, is investing a good chunk of her own inheritance into an affordable housing project because she realized the implications of redlining. And I also know someone who is looking into her own, like, I've heard from a couple people who are looking into their own ancestry and looking at the ways that their ancestry has affected other people because of slavery, having owned slaves in the past, and looking to get together with relatives to try to figure out how they can repent and repent in a way that involves the giving of their own resources as well. So those are just a few. Do hear stories a good bit though.
Great, thank you. Two questions that I'm going to answer quickly, and then I'll move on for more for Susie and Kristen. Someone asked if the $175 fee is for every participant or for the entire group, and it is for the entire group. So that is a one-time registration fee, which covers the registration fee for the whole group. I've had a few questions come in about how the program material is delivered. So at Just Faith Ministries, we deliver our programs through online accounts through our website. So what happens is, as you register for the group as a facilitator, you then get access by creating a username and password to log in and access your facilitator account, which has all of the documents you need as a facilitator. You're then you then get to invite your co-facilitator and participants to set up their own online account. So participants have a participant account, which has all of the documents and resources that they need in order to be a part of the program. I got a question asking if there's an automated email that goes out to participants letting them know about their assignments or updates for the coming week. There's not an automated email, but that content, again, is in their participant portal and participant account in chronological order. So they can access that all the time by logging into their account. And if facilitators think it's appropriate, then they can also send out weekly emails just to their small group over email with reminders and updates if they think their group needs the extra encouragement. One more question I'll answer is about the resources for the Faith and Racial Equity Program. So some of you know that we were back ordered. We had White Fragility was on back order. That book is currently in stock in our bookstore. We are waiting for, and it'll arrive next week. 40 Days of Prayer is on back order, but it should arrive at the beginning of next week, and then we'll begin shipping that out. Typically, when all of our books are in stock, it takes about a week from you ordering the books to them arriving to your location, including the packaging and then shipment time. Okay, Susie, why don't you answer this one? It says one session is for a guest speaker. who do you typically recommend for a guest speaker? Is that someone who should be a person of color, or what are your recommendations for guest speakers?
Yeah, I'll start, and again, Kristen, if you want to chime in and name some folks as well. For our group, and providentially, the guest speaker that we had was, well, let me go back. Sherry Mills, who wrote the 40 Days of Prayer book that's used as the spiritual practice in all three programs in the series. As I said, she's in administration right here at Simmons College in Louisville. So we invited her up to share with the staff, and she said, "Oh, you guys really need to talk to this professor we have, Dr. Lewis Brogdon at Simmons." And so we invited him as our guest speaker. And of course, you know, the rest is history, and we ended up forging a relationship with Simmons as well to work on this program series. So that's an avenue. You can certainly contact your local chapter of your Surge group, of your Black Lives Matter group, of your NAACP group, a local pastor maybe serving in an African American church, or Hispanic church, or yeah, I mean, you know, so those are some ideas of guest speakers. Anything else you would add?
Just that in this time of COVID, in some ways we're limited, but in other ways, you know, this is an opportunity. You can Zoom in somebody from anywhere in the world right now.
Yeah.
So you can think big about that. We do recommend that it be a person of color who is involved in racial justice work in some way, but ask someone whose racial justice work inspires you and inspires your group. And if possible, you know, have it be someone who offers opportunities to get involved.
It's always great to make the local connection. So if you do have a local, you know, person, but Kristen's right. You know, the world is your oyster right now in terms of guest speakers. If you can get somebody to talk on this issue, you can really Zoom them in from anywhere in the country.
Susie and Kristen, just to let you all know, we have a lot of more questions to get through. So
Okay.
obviously, let's answer the questions, but just so we can hopefully get through them as quickly as possible. I'm going to answer 3 questions. And the first is, a person asked, do we need to meet every week, or could we meet every other week? Typically, we recommend that folks meet every week. While it's an intense process, we think that intensity has a lot to do with its transformative power. With that being said, there are groups who meet every other week successfully. I would warn and recommend folks not, I would shy away from recommending folks to extend that time to 3 weeks, because the more time you have between meetings is going to increase the amount of time you have to spend at the beginning of each session, remembering that you trust these people and remembering what you last talked about and kind of getting back in the groove. So I would recommend probably not going past every other week unless you really need to. The next question, someone asked about kind of what tech needs do you need in order to facilitate this program successfully? So that question dramatically changes whether you're in person or virtual. And since I think most of us are meeting virtually, I'm going to speak to the virtual part of it. In order to facilitate a program over Zoom or another video conferencing platform, the facilitator does need to have some basic level knowledge about how that platform works in order to be able to share their screen, to do breakout rooms, and some of the other functions that are needed to facilitate our programs. You by no means have to be an expert or perfect at it, but it does require some knowledge. I will say, there's a woman I've been working with who went from literally not owning a computer to purchasing a computer, learning how to use the computer, learning what Zoom is, how to use Zoom, and now is in her 3rd week of facilitation. So it is possible for anyone to figure it out and to do it well, but it just takes that time and that commitment, and we have the support to help you through that. And then Susie, I'll turn this question over to you. For recruitment, should someone recruit just within recruitment of participants? Should they recruit for participants just in their church, or do you recommend that they expand that to their larger community?
I would recommend wherever you think people might be interested. You certainly don't have to limit it to your church. Yeah, you can do this with a group of friends. Certainly, you could do it in your church group. Um, you could do it with your book club. Although this isn't a book club, you could take your book club up a notch and do this with your book club. So yeah, sure. We'd encourage you to do it with a group, whatever group you can put together.
Okay, great. Someone asked about if they said if your church is going to do 2 small groups, do they pay $350 or is it just $175? So the $175 registration fee gives your church access to that program for an entire year, and you can run as many small groups as you're able to gather together for that year. So it could be 1 or it could be 18. The more the merrier right now. So that is great news. This next question, Kristen, I'm going to turn this over to you. It's asking about the defensiveness that often happens when people begin talking about race and the common response of, well, I'm not racist. How do we, through the guidelines that we offer, help facilitators navigate those kinds of situations?
Sure. And that's where, when I was saying at the very beginning, the piece about holy conversation comes in. And so we have these guidelines, and we reiterate them throughout. We encourage people to post the guidelines about how to have these holy conversations and how to respond to one another and how to listen. And we encourage people to post them in the room where you meet. Also, if you begin with faith and racial equity, we start with a book called White Fragility, which talks about that issue exactly. And the author, it's not an easy read, but the author does not let you off the hook on that one. So you start out with talking about defensiveness itself. And so that hopefully after that, at that conversation, I can almost guarantee you that you will have a minimal issue with defensiveness after reading that book.
Great, thank you, Kristen. Another question for you. Someone's asking about kind of the scope of this program. So do these programs explore in particular the African American experience and its connection to whiteness, or does it explore a variety of different people's experience, people of color? Would you speak to what the scope of the programs are and why we chose that scope?
Sure, absolutely. We thought a lot, long and hard about this question, and we decided that in order to do one thing well, rather than try to do too many things in a mediocre way, we decided to bring focus and attention to the African American experience, particularly descendants of slaves. And we focus on that experience throughout the 3 programs. That said, we believe very strongly that understanding this experience will help you to understand racism in its many forms and many other forms of oppression as well.
Okay, excuse me. I think I've gotten to the bottom of the chat, but it is a little challenging to scroll and to ensure that I haven't missed any questions. So if I did happen to miss your question, would you resend it in the chat to make sure it shows up in front of me, and we'll give a minute to see if any new questions come in.
While we're giving it a minute, I will tell you another, just a conversation that I did have the other day that actually 2 different churches, and this goes to the result of the program in churches, 2 different facilitators in churches indicated that they had, their church had instituted a racial justice group or committee that was now laser focused on that issue in the church, and that came out of the program.
Okay, I think that is it for tonight. I do want to let you all know that, as I mentioned earlier, I will be sending out a follow-up email that just contains some helpful links and, as I said, some information about the youth program and the racial justice sessions involved in that program. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or support you as you navigate how to get started in your community.
Thank you, Leela. And thank you again, all of you. Whether you're, like I said, whether you're interested in bringing this to your area, to your church, to your book group, or whether you're just interested in participating, you know, as Leela said, her name, Leila at justfaith.org. She's great at helping people walk through the logistics of getting a group up and running and answering all of your facilitation questions. So we thank you all for taking the time to be with us. If you think of a question later, don't hesitate to reach out. And in the interim, be well and stay well, everybody. Thanks so much.